Thank you for watching PBS. Coming up tonight at 7, Inside the Actors Studio, followed by The Cat Whisperer at 8 p.m. Next, Unsung Sheroes, Women of the Civil Rights Movement.
Movements for civil rights were a worldwide series of political movements for equality before the law that peaked in 1960. In many situations, it took the form of campaigns and civil resistance, aimed at achieving change through nonviolent forms of resistance. Popular civil rights leaders during the civil rights movement was Martin Luther King. He was a chairman of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He was a Baptist minister, an activist, and most famous leader of the civil rights movement. King won the Nobel Peace Prize and a Presidential Medal of Freedom. James Farmer. Farmer founded Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, a pacifist organization dedicated to achieving racial harmony and equality throughout nonviolence. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1998. John Lewis became a leader in the American Civil Rights Movement as the president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. A. Philip Randolph. He was a socialist in the labor movement and the civil rights movement. In 1925, Randolph organized the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. This was the first serious efforts to form a labor union for African Americans. What about our left out leaders, like Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, who played major parts in the civil rights movement? The movement of the 50s and 60s were carried largely by women, since it came out of the church groups. It was sort of a second nature for women to play supportive roles. How many made a conscious decision on the basis of a larger goal? How many on the basis of habit pattern? I don't know. But it's true that the number of women who carried the movement is much larger than that of a man. Ella Baker was a leader in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and worked with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She was not an advocate of the one great leader model of social change, but believed that ordinary people must be empowered to demand justice.
Strong people don't need strong leaders. This was the message that Ella Baker aimed to teach the future generation of civil rights activists. Ella was born in Virginia in 1903 and grew up in Littleton, North Carolina. Her parents were both educated children of former slaves. It was her mother who instilled in Ella the value of commitment to community service and racial uplift. Growing up in small-town North Carolina, she was raised in a community rich with Southern Black culture. Being raised with strong traditions of self-help, mutual cooperation, and sharing economic resources helped to form the basis of her early political awakening. At the age of 15, Ella began attending Shaw University, where she proved herself to be quite the young activist. She questioned the school's conservative philosophy and joined with her classmates on several occasions to protest the rigid regulations imposed on Shaw students. After graduating valedictorian of her class, Ella moved to New York City, hoping to find an outlet for her intellectual curiosity and concern for social justice. Her experience in New York proved to be a turning point in her life, as it had a huge impact on her evolving political consciousness. It was in New York that Ella joined her first political organization, the Young Negroes Cooperative League. The YNCL emphasized the full inclusion of women and the importance of grassroots involvement and empowerment. Perhaps the principle of the YNCL that most influenced Ella was their emphasis on a non-hierarchical leadership. Another organization that helped to forge many of her ideas was the Workers' Education Project, a program designed to equip workers with basic literacy skills and educate them on workforce topics. During the 30s, she also supported and worked with various women's groups such as Women's Day Workers and the Harlem Housewives Cooperative. Around 1940, Ella joined the NAACP, first as a field secretary, and then in 1943 she became the director of branches. As director, Baker fought to democratize the organization, and through her fieldwork, she helped to build a network of contacts in grassroots African American communities, which proved to be an indispensable resource. Baker became frustrated with the top-down bureaucratic structure of the NAACP, so she resigned from her director position in 1946. However, she continued to volunteer with the organization and became the first female president of the New York branch. In her role as president, Ella was a leader in school reform campaigns and sought the desegregation in New York City schools, heading a coalition called Parents in Action Against Discrimination in Education. No matter what group or organization she became a part of, Baker refused to be regulated to a separate women's sphere. She participated in meetings without reservation, even when she was the only woman present. Many of her closest political allies she worked with were men, including the famous Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In 1958, Baker moved to Atlanta to coordinate on the Crusade for Citizenship, a voter rights campaign launched by MLK and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The crusade sought to raise awareness among African Americans that their chances for improvement were dependent on their ability to vote. Although Baker respected King, she also felt that the increasing reliance on his public persona to mobilize people was channeling the civil rights movement and energy in the wrong direction. She did not like that the organization was run from the top down, and she believed that strong people did not need strong leaders. In February of 1960, 4 African American students sat down at a whites-only lunch counter at a Woolworth store in North Carolina. The men were refused service and were asked to leave. Instead of leaving, the men who have come to be known as the Greensboro Four stayed at the counter until the store closed. The next day, 20 more students joined them and the sit-in campaign officially began. Ella, already dissatisfied with the leadership of the SCLC, immediately shifted her attention to what would prove to be the cutting edge of the growing Black freedom movement. She took a position in the regional student office at the YWCA to remain close to the students and help maximize the momentum of this new upsurge in mass direct action by African American youth. She utilized the YWCA as a base of operation and helped to recruit new members for the organization. In April of 1960, she called a conference of the sit-in leaders, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was born. The SNCC was an alternative to the more politically moderate and hierarchical civil rights organizations. They were militant in their tactics and egalitarian in structure. The independent organization was based upon principles of grassroots democracy and a decentralized, group-centered leadership. The SNCC offered women, poor people, and youth 3 forces Baker saw as the backbone of the movement, the ability to contribute to the movement. The SNCC embodied the principles and politics that Ella had fought for most of her adult life. During her work with the SNCC, she served as an experienced adult advisor, a role model, and an intellectual mentor to many of the young SNCC leaders. Ella Baker's behind-the-scenes work during the civil rights movement earned her the nickname Fundi, a Swahili word meaning a person who teaches their craft to the next generation. Ella took it upon herself to help people, both young and old, recognize their own capabilities and powers and understand how they can use them for the greater good. Ella Baker believed that if you give people the light, they will find the way.
Fannie Lou Hamer was not just a woman of words, but a woman of deeds. In fact, it was her struggle against poverty that was the real war on poverty. She dedicated her life not only to challenging political, social, and economic structures, but to creating conditions that facilitated the development of self-reliance and self-determination among blacks and other poor people of the world. As Hamer would say, it's in your hands.
Fannie Lou Hamer may be best remembered for the words chiseled on her gravestone, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." But the resignation suggested in that famous phrase was not part of Hamer's constitution. She was an irrepressible fighter who fearlessly stood up to the worst elements of the Mississippi power structure during the 1960s civil rights movement. Hamer was the youngest of 20 children born to Jim and Ella Townsend of Ruleville, Mississippi. The Townsends were impoverished, hard-working sharecroppers in the heart of the cotton country. In the 1940s, she met her husband, Perry Pap Hamer, who worked on the Marlowe plantation. They worked together on the plantation for 18 years until she was fired for trying to vote. She experienced racism in its many forms. In 1961, she went into a hospital to have a small uterine tumor removed. Doctors performed a hysterectomy, which sterilized her without her knowledge or permission. The couple later adopted 4 girls. Fannie Lou Hamer was first exposed to activism in the 1950s when she attended meetings of the Regional Council of Negro Leadership founded by Mississippi physician T.R.M. Howard to promote voter registration, equal schools, and other civil rights. The meetings featured speeches by Northern black elected officials and by NAACP attorney Thurgood Marshall. When organizers from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference came to Ruleville in August 1962, Hamer was ready. Deeply moved, she was the first to raise her hand high when the organizers asked who would be willing to register to vote. Soon after, Hamer and 17 other brave souls took the bus to Sunflower County's seat in Indianola, Mississippi, to try to register to vote. On the bus, she began singing hymns such as Go Tell It on the Mountain and This Little Light of Mine to bolster the group's morale. In June 1963, she and others in the group were traveling by bus through Mississippi en route to Greenwood. They stopped at the small town of Winona, and several of the group went into a segregated cafe. Even though they had broken no law, they were arrested. Hamer spent a harrowing time in the Montgomery County Jail, where she and her comrades were beaten mercifully with blackjacks by 2 African-American male inmates whom the jailers had intimidated. In addition, Hamer and her husband were constantly harassed by local officials. For example, one day they received a $9,000 water bill even though the Hamer house had no running water. In 1964, Hamer helped organize the Freedom Summer, educating and training busloads of idealistic volunteers, many of them college students who came from the North to help register voters. That year, Hamer helped found the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, or MFDP, a pivotal part of the movement's strategy to shine a national spotlight on the disenfranchisement of African Americans in the South. Several MFDP activists ran for office in the Democratic primary, challenging white segregationist incumbents. Hamer ran against Representative Jamie Whitten, who had the seat since 1941. She had no chance to win because most blacks could not vote, but she used the campaign to give the MFDP project visibility and to show African Americans how the election process worked. After organizing for months, MDFP sent an integrated delegation of 68 members, including Hamer, to represent Mississippi at the 1964 Democratic Party Convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey in August. This was a direct challenge to the official all-white delegation, which brutally excluded blacks from voting. Hamer stood before the party's credentials committee and, with television cameras rolling, delivered an emotional speech telling the world what it was like for African Americans trying to be first-class citizens in Mississippi. If the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, Hamer asked? The land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hooks because our lives be threatened daily because we want to live as decent human beings in America? She spoke of her own beatings and of the murders of NAACP leader Medgar Evers and of 3 other civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodwin, and Michael Schwerner, who only a few days earlier had been slain near Philadelphia, Mississippi. President Lyndon B. Johnson called a last-minute press conference to divert press coverage from Hamer's testimony, but many TV networks ran her speech on their late news programs. The Credentials Committee received thousands of calls and letters in support of the MFDP. Johnson, who would soon be campaigning and hoped to avoid controversy in the national spotlight, persuaded the Credentials Committee to offer MFDP 2 at-large seats. The MFDP rejected the deal, arguing that it was too little, but they succeeded in keeping the pressure on. At the next Democratic Party convention in 1968, Hamer was part of an integrated Mississippi delegation. Hamer's passion was not limited to electoral politics. She wanted to change living conditions and organized several projects aimed at raising the dignity and living standards of her fellow Mississippians. She testified before U.S. Senate committees on poverty and attended the 1969 White House Conference on Hunger.
Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer, who were not as well known as some of the other civil rights leaders, knew that among a group of ministers they would not play a major role in the circle of leaders. However, the movement and its results were more important to them than their visibility. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Go tell it on the mountain.